Ossian woke reaching for a shoulder that was not there, and understood, before his eyes were open, that she had gone. The winter estate was silent in the particular way of a house that has already made its decision. He lay still for a long moment, listening for the sound of her in the next room, the scrape of a chair, the small clatter of jars on her work table, and heard nothing but the wind working at the shutters. When he finally sat up, the space beside him had gone cold. Not recently cold. Cold the way stone is cold, the way something is cold, when it has been empty for hours. He did not call out for her. He had learned, in the 6 months since she had come to the estate, that calling for Odalis never worked. She answered when she was ready, and only then. So he dressed in the grey half-light and went looking, and it was in the quiet of that looking, down the frost-slick corridor, past her empty work-table, into the small stone room where she kept her herbs, that he understood the shape of what had happened. Her cloak was gone from its hook. Her boots, the ones with the split seam along the left heel that let the cold in, and that she had never once complained about, were not by the door. The wooden box where she kept her mother's thimble sat open and empty on the shelf. She had taken nothing that was his. She had taken only what had always been hers, which was very little, and she had not left a letter, because Odalis Marrow did not explain herself to people who had already been given every chance to ask. To understand why the room was empty, it is necessary to go back 6 months, to the morning a war-thin healer arrived at the border of the Alpha King's winter estate, with a satchel of herbs and no papers to speak her name. She had come because the border village of Ashmere had lost its healer to a fever the previous spring, and someone had to tend to the estate's small staff through the cold months, and Odalis Marrow was the only person who answered the posting. She was 23, competent in the specific and unglamorous way of someone who had learned her trade by necessity rather than choice, and she arrived at the winter estate expecting to set bones and brew fever teas, and otherwise be entirely unremarkable to the household she served. She was very good at being unremarkable. It was, in fact, the thing she was best at. The Alpha King's estate at the edge of his territory was a small, isolated household. A handful of staff, a skeleton guard, and the Alpha King himself, who came to the winter estate twice a year to escape the noise of his capital and see to the border with his own eyes. Odalis had expected to work in the estate's lower rooms and never once be in the same corridor as him. For the first 3 weeks, she was right. The house itself was built for function rather than ceremony. Thick stone walls to hold what little warmth the fires could produce, narrow windows that let in more cold than light, corridors that funneled every draught toward whichever unlucky soul happened to be walking them at the time. Odalis had grown up in houses like this one, in service to families who barely knew her name, and she had long since stopped expecting comfort from any building she was assigned to. She took the small stone room at the end of the east wing without complaint, hung her dried herbs from the low rafters, and set about learning the specific rhythms of a household that had not needed a resident healer in over a year, and had half forgotten how to make use of one properly. She ate at the second sitting, after the guards and before the stable hands, at a table where conversation moved around her, without including her, which suited her well enough. She had never been unhappy in her invisibility. She had simply, over the years, stopped waiting for it to end. She set the stable-master's dislocated shoulder without flinching at the sound it made going back into place. She sat up 2 nights running with a guard's daughter through a fever that the previous healer's remedies had not touched, and the girl lived, and Odalis went back to her work table the next morning as though nothing had happened, because nothing, to her, had. This was simply what she did. She did not perform the care. She did not wait to be thanked. She had learned long ago that the people who needed tending rarely had the strength left over to notice who was tending them, and she had made her peace with that a long time before she ever set foot in this cold stone house. It was the 4th week when the Alpha King's wolf began sleeping outside her door. No one could explain it, least of all Ossian. His wolf, the animal instinct that lived beneath his skin and had, for the 11 years of his reign, done exactly what he told it to do, had simply stopped answering to him on the matter of the healer's threshold. He would order it to stay by the hearth in his own chambers, and in the morning he would wake to find it gone, and Wren, his second, would report that it had been seen again outside the healer's door, lying across the stone with its head on its paws, like something keeping watch. Ossian did not understand it. What he understood, even less, was that his own feet had begun taking him past her work table on mornings when he had no correspondence to deliver and no reason at all to be in that wing of the house. The first thing he noticed about her that had nothing to do with his wolf's strange devotion was a column of numbers. He found it by accident, a supply ledger left open on a side table, corrected in a hand that was not the steward's. Someone had caught an error in the winter grain allotment, quietly, in the margin, without comment or signature, and moved on. He asked the steward who had made the correction. The steward did not know. It took him 3 days to work out that it was her, and when he did, he found himself standing in the doorway of the storeroom, reading the correction a 4th time, turning over the fact that she had fixed something that was not her responsibility to fix, and told no one, and would likely never have mentioned it if he had not gone looking. He brought it up to her the following week, in the small stone room that smelled of dried yarrow and tallow. He had not meant to go there specifically. He had told himself he was checking on the guard's daughter's recovery. "You corrected the grain ledger," he said. She did not look up from the herbs she was sorting. "Someone had to." "It was not your task." "No," she agreed. "It was the steward's task, and he had it wrong, and the difference would have mattered by February." She glanced up then, and there was nothing deferential in the look, not insolence either, just the flat, appraising honesty of someone who had decided a long time ago that bowing her head cost more than it was worth. "Is that a complaint, my lord?" "No," he said, and found that he meant it more than the single word suggested. "How long have you been in the East Wing?" 6 years, on and off, between postings. This is the first winter I've stayed at the estate itself." "I did not know that." "Most people don't." She went back to her sorting. There was nothing else to say, so he left, and came back the next morning, with no better excuse than the one before it. Over the following weeks, the shape of an understanding began to form between them, built almost entirely out of things neither of them said aloud. He had the north corridor's torches relit an hour earlier each evening. After he noticed, she walked back from the guards' quarters after dark, and the corridor had been badly lit for years. He told his steward it was a fire safety correction. His steward did not ask why the Alpha King had developed an opinion about one healer's evening route, though the question sat plainly on his face. She, in turn, began leaving a specific blend of feverfew and willow bark on the shelf outside his study on the mornings after council sessions ran long into the night. The mornings his temples ached in the particular way she had noticed once, from across a room, and never mentioned. Neither of them acknowledged the exchange directly. It simply became a fact of the household, the way weather is a fact. There was a morning, in the 3rd week of this quiet accumulation, when he found her in the kitchen yard before dawn, feeding the last of her bread to a half-starved barn cat that had been living beneath the granary since autumn. She did not know he was watching. She spoke to the animal the same way she spoke to everyone, plainly without performance, as though its opinion of her mattered as much as anyone's. And when it finally let her touch it, she did not smile the triumphant smile of someone who had won something. She simply kept feeding it, because it was hungry and she had bread, and that, to her, was the whole of the reasoning required. Ossian stood in the shadow of the doorway longer than he meant to, and did not announce himself at all. He came back the next morning to find the cat curled asleep in an empty grain sack by her work table, and said nothing about that either, though he made certain the kitchen staff knew to save its scraps from then on and never told her why. It was in the 5th week that she saw him in a way she had not expected to. She had gone to the council wing after hours to return a borrowed ledger and found the door to the small side chamber ajar. He was alone at the table, the lords long gone, a single candle burnt low, and he was staring at a letter he had clearly read more than once. His jaw tight, his shoulders carrying something she recognized because she had carried versions of it herself. He did not know she was there. She did not enter. She stood in the dark of the corridor for longer than she meant to, watching the most powerful man in the territory sit alone with a weight he had no one to hand it to. And she understood, in that unguarded moment, that the authority everyone deferred to was also underneath it, a person managing a cost that nobody else was asked to see. She said nothing about it. She carried the sight of him alone into the following weeks, the way she carried everything, quietly and by herself. It was in the 6th week that the wolf did something it had never done in 11 years of Ossian's reign. It refused entirely to leave her side during a border patrol gone wrong. A skirmish at the eastern boundary line brought 3 wounded guards back to the estate in the middle of the night, one of them bleeding badly enough that the household staff stood back from him in the doorway, unsure whether he would survive the hour. Odalis did not stand back. She had him on the table in her small stone room within minutes, her hands steady in a way that made the other healers in training who assisted her go quiet and simply do what she told them. Ossian's wolf had come with the wounded party, and when the guard began to fail, his breathing going shallow and wrong, something in Ossian's chest turned over so hard he had to grip the doorframe. He did not shift. He wanted to, badly, in a way that frightened him more than the wound did. His wolf pushed against his control, from somewhere old and wordless, some instinct that had already decided something his conscious mind had not caught up to, and for the length of that hour Ossian stood in the doorway of a healer's workroom, feeling like a man, watching himself from a great distance. The guard lived. Odalis sat back from the table afterward with blood on her sleeves, and her hands finally shaking, now that there was no one left who needed them steady. And it was Ossian who crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, an alpha king on his knees, in a room that smelled of blood and yarrow, and took her hands in both of his, without asking permission. "You did that," he said. His voice was not steady either. "It's my work," she said. "It is not only your work." He did not let go of her hands. Neither of them moved to make him. It was the first deliberate touch either of them had allowed themselves, and it lasted only as long as it took her pulse to slow, and afterward neither of them spoke of it, though both of them remembered exactly how long it had lasted. The archivist, an old man named Corwin, who had outlived every hierarchy he had ever been asked to maintain, found Ossian 3 days later, staring at a shelf of estate records he had no obvious reason to be reading. "You are looking for something you do not know the shape of," Corwin observed, not unkindly. "My wolf will not leave her door," Ossian said. "It has never disobeyed me. Not once, in 11 years. Corwin was quiet for a long moment. Then he went to a locked cabinet at the back of the archive and produced a document sealed with wax that had gone brittle with age. "There is a compact," he said, "signed by your grandfather's grandfather, 214 years ago. It concerns the suppression of certain bonds the Crown found. Inconvenient. A compound brewed into the wine of anyone the old king judged unsuitable, that dulls the bond before it can complete. It has not been used in living memory. I assumed it had been forgotten." He set the document on the table. "Your wolf is not disobeying you, my lord. I believe something is failing that was never meant to fail this long." Ossian read the document twice. The suppression, once administered, was meant to last a single season, long enough for a king to be steered toward a more suitable match before an unwanted bond could take hold. It required renewal. It had not been renewed in this generation, because no one currently living had known it existed to renew. He asked carefully, who among the living had known? Corwin's silence answered before his words did. "Lady Isbeth," he said finally. "She has asked me for archive access twice this season. I did not think to ask why." Isbeth Varlo had been promised to Ossian since before either of them could object to the arrangement, a match made by his father and hers, sealed in the particular language of alliance rather than affection, and quietly allowed to lapse 3 years earlier, when Ossian had simply never formalized it, and Isbeth had never pushed. She had returned to the winter estate that autumn, under the pretense of a border dispute concerning her family's northern lands, and she had watched, with a patience that unsettled even the staff who liked her, as the Alpha King's attention drifted somewhere she had not accounted for. She did not confront Odalis directly. She was too careful for that. Instead, she was warm in every room Ossian occupied, and warmer still in the rooms Odalis occupied, complimenting her steady hands and her useful skills with a smile that never once reached the eyes above it. It was Isbeth who suggested, gently over dinner, that perhaps the healer's presence at the estate had gone on rather longer than her posting required. It was Isbeth who mentioned in passing, to 2 lords visiting from the capital, that the Alpha King's wolf had taken an unusual interest in a border village healer of no particular family, said with just enough amusement that the lords laughed, and the laugh reached Odalis before the words did. Odalis said nothing. She had learned, in 23 years of being looked through, exactly which battles cost more than they were worth. But she noticed, the way she noticed everything, that Isbeth's warmth toward her had a schedule to it, brightest when Ossian was in the room, thinnest to the point of vanishing when he was not. She noticed, too, that Isbeth began asking the estate's steward pointed questions about how long a posted healer's contract typically ran, and whether the crown ever paid to relocate one early if the household's needs changed. Odalis answered none of these questions when they eventually reached her second hand. She simply kept working, because the one thing she had never permitted anyone to take from her was the plain fact of being useful, and she was not about to hand that over to a woman who had never once had to earn it herself. The winter deepened, and the estate's isolation pressed the 3 of them closer together than any of them would have chosen. There was no capital's worth of distance to retreat into, no crowd of lords to disappear behind. Every meal, every corridor, every council update passed among the same small handful of people, and the tension of it sat under the household's ordinary business, the way frost sits under snow, invisible until something breaks the surface. The confrontation, when it came, did not happen the way either of them expected. Ossian found the second sealed portion of the old compact 3 days after Corwin showed him the first, a personal letter tucked behind the formal document, written in his own grandfather's hand, addressed not to a future king, but to whichever healer might one day need the truth of it. It confirmed what Corwin had guessed. The suppression had been renewed, quietly, every season, by whichever royal healer held the post, and Isbeth, in her 2 visits to the archive, had requested the schedule of renewal specifically, and had, according to Corwin's careful cross-referencing of the estate's stores, obtained a fresh dose of the suppressant from a supplier in the capital 3 weeks earlier. Ossian did not go to Isbeth first. He went to Odalis. He found her in her workroom at dusk, and he set both documents on her table without a word, because he had learned by then that she trusted evidence more than declarations. She read them slowly, twice, her face giving away nothing until she reached the second letter, and her hands went very still. The stillness he had learned, without ever being told, meant she was more afraid than she would say. "You knew," she said finally. It was not an accusation. It was worse than that. It was a question she already suspected the answer to. "I knew there was a compact," he said. "I did not know until Corwin showed me. I did not know what it meant for—" He stopped. He had never, in 11 years, had to find the end of that sentence before, and it cost him more than she understood at first. "I did not tell you the moment I knew. I told myself I needed to understand it first. That was not entirely true. Some part of me did not want to hand you a reason to leave before I had decided what I was going to do about it." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was even, which was somehow worse than if it had shaken. "You had days to tell me, and you spent them deciding what you were going to do about it instead." "Yes," he said. He did not soften it. He had learned that much from her, at least, that she did not want the sentence dressed up. She did not weep. She did not raise her voice. She set the letters down very carefully on the table, as though they might still matter to someone, and she said, "I need to think." And he left, because he had also learned that pressing her when she said that cost more than it gained. That was the last full conversation they had before she was gone. He went to Isbeth that same night, and the confrontation that followed was not the public reckoning the old stories favoured. No great hall, no gathered witnesses, no dramatic unmasking. It was two people in a cold corridor at midnight, and Ossian holding the supplier's receipt from the capital in one hand. Isbeth did not deny it. She was too controlled for outright denial, and too proud, in the end, to pretend she had not understood exactly what she was doing. "You were never going to choose her over the alliance," she said, "not consciously. I was only making sure your wolf did not choose for you before your mind caught up. I did you a kindness. You suppressed a bond that was never yours to suppress. I protected a match that mattered to both our fathers." Her composure did not crack, not fully, but something in her voice thinned. "I did not enjoy it. I want you to understand that. I did not hate her. I hated what she meant for the future I had spent my whole life being told to want." He did not raise his voice. His stillness in that moment was worse than shouting would have been, a coldness that made the guards posted nearby find urgent reasons to be elsewhere. "The council will hear of the compact's misuse, not from me alone, from Corwin's records, which will speak for themselves. Whatever the outcome, you do not do this again, not to her, not to anyone." Isbeth left the estate before dawn the following morning, her claim to the old alliance formally struck from record within the week, her family's northern petition quietly dropped from the council's docket. She was not destroyed. She was simply, finally, no longer relevant to anything that mattered, and she left the territory the way she had entered every room in it, with her composure fully intact and nothing underneath it left to protect. Ossian did not know that night that while he stood in that corridor doing the only thing he knew how to do, dismantling the threat with evidence and procedure, the way he dismantled everything, Odalis was in her workroom packing the only things that had ever truly been hers. He woke to the empty room, and he understood. He did not call the guards to search for her. He knew, somehow, exactly what an empty room like that one meant, and it was not a woman who had wandered off in distress. It was a woman who had made a decision, alone, in the particular quiet of someone who has done all her deciding without an audience her entire life, and did not intend to be talked out of it by anyone, least of all by him. He searched anyway. He searched the way a man searches when the alternative is standing still with what he has done. He questioned the gate guard, who reported that a woman matching her description had left before first light, on foot, with a small satchel, walking north toward the village road, with no escort and no hesitation in her step. He questioned the stable-master, who confirmed no horse was missing, which meant she intended to walk the full distance to Ashmere in the dead of winter, rather than accept anything further from this house. His wolf, for the first time in 6 weeks, did not go looking for her door. It simply lay down in the middle of his empty chambers and would not be moved, and Ossian understood that too, that whatever had been suppressed in him for 214 years of ancestral caution had finally, fully failed, and it had failed 3 days too late to matter. He gave it 2 days before he rode after her, not out of hesitation, out of the recognition, finally arrived at, that riding after her within the hour would have been for his own relief rather than her actual well-being, and he had done enough, in the last several days, of choosing what was easiest for himself to bear. He sent Wren ahead first, alone, with no message beyond an offer, safe passage, a physician's escort if she wanted the border road watched, and nothing else. No demand that she return, no claim laid on her at all. It was Wren who came back 3 days later with word that she had not gone to Ashmere. She had gone further north, to a smaller village even than that, one with no healer at all, and had already set up a workroom in a borrowed shed and begun tending the local children's winter coughs, because that, in the end, was the one thing Odalis Marrow could not stop herself from doing, regardless of where she was or what had been done to her. Ossian rode north alone. He left the estate in Corwin's steady hands and Wren's loyal ones, and he made the 3-day journey through hard winter roads with nothing to offer her but the truth, unaccompanied by any argument for why the truth ought to be enough. He found her exactly where Wren had said, a small stone shed at the edge of a village, too poor to have kept a healer of its own, her breath fogging in the cold as she ground herbs at a borrowed table, her hands as steady as they had always been, and something in his chest that had been braced for weeks finally, quietly, came undone at the sight of her whole and well in doing, in this small poor place, exactly what she had always done everywhere. She looked up when the door opened. She did not look surprised. She had known, on some level, that he would come eventually, not because she expected him to fix anything with the coming, but because she had come to understand, in 6 months at his estate, that Ossian Draketh did not leave things unfinished when he had finally decided to face them. "I am not here to ask you to come back," he said, before she could speak. "I came because I owed you a conversation I should have had 3 days sooner than I did, and I did not think it fair to make you wait for it any longer than you already had." She set down the herbs. She did not answer immediately. Outside, the wind worked at the shed's loose shutter, and inside, neither of them moved to fill the silence, because both of them had learned, somewhere in the last 6 months, that silence between them was not the same as absence. "Say it, then," she said. "I should have told you the moment I suspected, not after I had a plan for what to do about it. You are not a problem I am permitted to manage before I disclose it to you. You are a person who deserved the truth the hour I had it, even unfinished, even frightening, even if it meant you left before I had decided anything at all." He stopped. The rest came harder. "I am not asking you to forgive the delay. I am telling you I understand now what it cost, and I will not do it again, not to you, and if I am honest with myself, not to anyone, because I think I have spent most of my life managing things before I let people see the managing. You were the first person who ever made me want to stop." She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had none of the careful evenness she had left the estate with. "I did not leave because you lied by omission for 3 days, she said. "I left because for 6 years I have watched people decide things about my life without consulting me, and I promised myself a long time ago that the day someone I trusted did it again, I would not stay to argue about it. I would simply go, because arguing has never once changed anyone's mind about me. It only costs me the argument." "I know," he said. "I am not here to argue you out of that promise. I am here because I would rather you leave me a second time, knowing the whole truth, than have you gone the first time on half of it." Something in her face shifted then. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of the recognition that he had come 3 days' hard ride, not to reclaim her, but simply to finish a conversation properly, and ask nothing of her in return but the chance to have said it. She crossed the small distance between them, and pressed her forehead to his, and neither of them spoke for a long moment, and the silence held everything neither of them yet had words for. She did not return with him that week. She finished what she had started in the small northern village, 3 weeks of tending a place that had gone without a healer for a generation, because she did not abandon work half done any more than she abandoned herself, and Ossian did not press her to hurry. He rode back to the estate and sent, instead of demands, small, honest reports. The state of the northern roads after the thaw began, a dry account of a council session that had run long, the fact that his wolf had finally begun sleeping again, though only fitfully, and only ever facing the direction she had gone. She came back to the estate on her own timeline in early spring, and when she did not come back as anyone's rescued healer. She came back because she had decided, on her own and without an audience, that the estate was where she wanted her workroom to be, and because Ossian Draketh had ridden 3 days to finish a conversation properly instead of simply asking her to come home, and that had told her more about him than any grand claim ever could have. Weeks passed, and then months, and the estate settled into the particular new ordinary of a household that had absorbed a great deal of quiet upheaval and gone on regardless. Corwin filed the old compact away with a formal notation that it was never to be renewed or invoked again, and hung the second letter, the personal one, the one meant for whichever healer eventually found the truth of it, in a simple frame in the archive, not hidden, where anyone curious enough to ask could read exactly what had almost happened here. Odalis was still herself. She still wore the same worn boots with the split seam at the heel, though Ossian had quietly had a better pair made and left them outside her door without comment, and she wore the new ones only on the coldest mornings, and the old ones every other day, because she had grown fond of them, the way she grew fond of anything that had served her honestly. Her hands still bore the small burns and calluses of her work, and she still went still and quiet when she was frightened rather than loud, though she was, these days, rarely frightened of anything in this particular house. The barn cat had taken up permanent residence in her workroom by then, fat and unbothered, sleeping most days in the empty grain sack it had claimed the previous autumn, and it was Wren, of all people, who had taken to sneaking its scraps from the kitchen when he thought no one was watching. Corwin visited most mornings, under the pretense of needing a tincture for his knees, though everyone in the household understood by then that he simply preferred her company to the archive's silence, and he stayed longer than any tincture required, telling her half-remembered stories of kings long dead as she worked. The estate had not entirely restructured itself around her presence. There were still council members from the capital who did not know quite what to make of a border healer who sat, uninvited but unchallenged, at the Alpha King's own table, and this was acknowledged, when it was acknowledged at all, without any particular drama. Some things simply took longer to settle than others, and Odalis had never needed everyone's understanding to feel steady in her own place. Ossian had learned, in the months since, that his version of intimacy was offering her the small, true things he had once managed alone. His complicated history with a council lord, his honest opinion of the state of the eastern granaries, the fact that he slept better with the window cracked to the cold air, a preference he had never told anyone before her. He told her these things matter-of-factly, as reports rather than confessions, and she had come to understand this was simply how he loved, by handing over the small, unglamorous truths of himself, the way she handed over care, without asking for anything in return, but that it be received. His wolf, once suppressed for 214 years by a fear no living person remembered, slept now at the foot of her work table most evenings, entirely unremarkable, the way a thing becomes ordinary once it has stopped being forbidden. On a clear morning in early spring, Odalis stood at her work table sorting the first of the season's yarrow, her hands moving with the same unhurried competence they always had, and Ossian came to stand in the doorway the way he had once, before either of them had a name for what that habit meant. "You never asked me why I changed the corridor torches," he said, "that first winter. I assumed it was fire safety, she said, without looking up, though there was something at the corner of her mouth that gave her away. It was not fire safety. I know that now. She set down the herbs and turned to face him fully. You could have simply said so back then. I could have, he agreed. I am better at reports than declarations. I am working on it. I noticed. She crossed the small distance between them, the way she had learned to do without hesitation now, and rested her hand flat against his chest, feeling the steady, unremarkable fact of his heartbeat under her palm. He covered her hand with his own and did not let it go, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because there was, finally, nothing urgent left that needed saying. He kissed her then, once, careful, unhurried, the way a man keeps a promise he has finally earned the right to make. Outside, the wind had gone quiet for the first time in months, and the wolf at her feet did not stir, because there was nothing left in this house for it to guard against. The morning light came in pale and gold through the narrow window, catching the frame around Corwin's old letter on the far wall, and neither of them looked at it, because it no longer needed looking at. It was simply part of the house now, the way she was, the way the whole ordinary, unremarkable morning was, carrying, finally, no weight at all. If someone you trusted was managing a truth on your behalf, deciding when you were ready to hear it, instead of handing it to you the moment they had it, would you have stayed long enough to hear the whole of it, or would you have already been gone? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time.